Hi, everybody. My name is Miles, and I'm with Peak Performers. Thank you very much for joining me on the very first ever disability idea. I started this particular segment actually talking with Matthew Shapiro, our guest today, because after years and years and years as a disability inclusion partner, I realized that I really only had my own experience to draw from. And so he really inspired me to be able to create a new content series, specifically kind of digging deeper into some more niche topics around disability inclusion, as well as exploring some other ideas a little bit more, and maybe even challenging our preconceptions about what we think it means to live and work with a disability. Matthew Shapiro is a gentleman that I met at a Richmond roundtable, a great individual and a wealth of knowledge and insight. So I'm so glad to have him on. And give me just a second, and I'm going to bring him on. All
Hello.
right, Matthew,
Hello.
welcome.
How we doing? How you doing, Miles?
I'm doing good, man. I am feeling fresh and full of pep this 2026. Like
There
I
you
just
go.
have
Good
so
way to
much
start the year.
energy.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year's to you as well, man. Yeah. So, Matthew, if you wouldn't mind, do a quick introduction for yourself and who you are.
Yeah, sure. So first of all, I want to say I'm very humbled to be your first guest on this new content experience. So thank you for that. We can go on this maiden voyage together, as they like to say. Hi everybody. I am Matthew Shapiro. I am the founder and CEO of Six Wheels Consulting. We are a for-profit consulting business that strives to work with anybody really to think about how to be more accessible and inclusive to people with disabilities beyond just being ADA compliant. So,
Love
you
it.
know, oftentimes society kind of does the bare minimum of what's required to be inclusive and accessible based on what the ADA says. And I want us to challenge that, right? Let's make our spaces as inclusive as possible. Let's, welcome people with disabilities into all spaces. And we do our work kind of in three buckets. We do consulting initiatives. I am a registered lobbyist in the Virginia General Assembly. Our session is actually set to begin next week. I'm not quite ready yet, but we will be. And I am also a public speaker, speaking at a variety of different places, colleges and universities, conferences. We're actually heading to Pennsylvania next week
Hmm.
to speak at a conference. So I love what I do. I definitely am glad I got the time off for I took about 2 weeks off for the holidays, and boy, let me tell you, was it needed? But I love what I do, and very excited to be part of the conversation today, Miles.
Well, I'm excited to have you. And just kind of diving into the topic at hand, too. You inspired me from our conversations right towards the end there of 2025, where you were like, hey, everybody is talking about the same darn things that we've been talking about
Yeah.
since the dawn of the ADA, right?
Yep.
35 years ago, we're still talking about access, we're still talking about accommodations and stuff. But what's next? And I got to ask you, like, what do you think is going to be next within the field of disability advocacy for
Yeah,
2026 and
that's
beyond?
that's such a broad question, right? And such a great question, right? I mean, it's I think about things like driverless cars, right? Like how will when we finally get to a place where there are driverless cars, right? How will that impact people with disabilities? I think about artificial intelligence and like how that can be used as a tool to level the playing field that much more in disability spaces. I think about entrepreneurship, right? We talk about employment a lot as a barrier for people with disabilities, and we are getting better, but we don't often still talk about entrepreneurship as a potential way of solving that employment gap. And that for me was my route to employment, right? I went through the traditional route. I did interviews, thought that they went really well. I love to talk. My greatest asset is my voice, and so I thought I was doing really well in interviews, but was never getting job offers. And so, uh, in December of 2014, I was laying in bed one night after having tons of experience as a younger person, as a youth. I still think I'm a youth. I'll be a youth at heart for as long as I can think. But when I was a younger person, really starting to get involved in self determination work and youth engagement work for people with disabilities. Um, I had all that experience, and I was doing consulting and things at that time, but it wasn't, I was doing small projects here and there and getting stipends for it, but I didn't know it as a consultant, right? And I was doing public speaking, and I had the policy bug, and so in December of 2014, I took all that experience and launched Six Wheels Consulting. It's called Six Wheels Consulting because there are six wheels on my wheelchair. I'm a wheelchair user due to having been born 12 weeks premature
Mhm,
and diagnosed with cerebral palsy.
mhm.
And so I use a power chair to navigate the world that we all get to experience. And I, like I said, I started Six Wheels to try to kind of create my own path. And typically, as we have to do, people with disabilities often have to create their own path because we sort of live in a society that isn't built for us as people with disabilities. And so, you know, entrepreneurship is one thing that I'm looking at, artificial intelligence, smart devices, you know, uh, inclusion on a much deeper level, right?
Mhm.
And I would love a world where I don't have to worry about and I don't have to plan for, can I get into a given space? Can I do a thing? All the time I am having to plan every aspect of every part of my day. And I would love to live in a space where just by nature I would know that something would work. Right? That's not where we are now, but that is a driving and a motivating factor for why I know Miles, why you do your work, and why I do my work that I do with Six Wheels. So yeah, I think those are some areas. There's more, but
I'm going to add one more to you, actually.
please,
So,
please.
I think that we live right now in a culture where self disclosure is much more common,
Mhm.
particularly around the neurodiverse community. In fact, I see many people within my network that will label themselves as neurodiverse, right?
Sure.
And if anybody were to Google me, they'd be able to find out pretty quickly that I'm hard of hearing, right?
Sure.
And so, part of me that the future of advocacy and maybe some issues that we need to keep on our radar is what are companies going to do with that information, especially if it is in regards to marketing or pricing. So you start thinking about things like you probably get your own insurance, right? Like
Yeah.
how could a company use that information knowing that you're disabled to try to charge you higher rates? Or how could somebody that knows that I'm hearing impaired specifically push particular ads towards me for hearing assistive devices? And how do we make sure that that's done in an ethical way? I
Sure.
mean, when it comes to price gouging, I I have a trouble with of justifying that.
Yeah, I mean, from like a price gouging standpoint, it's funny. Like my mom makes the joke all the time that if it's a popsicle stick, right, it's 5 cents or it's
Mhm.
5 cents or whatever. But if it's a popsicle stick that you can turn into a splint, that's a medical device, it's $500, right? Like there's a notion that um like everything related to disability is so expensive,
Mhm.
right? And to me, that's kind of backwards, right? Like why I need this wheelchair in order to live my life on a day-to-day basis. So why is my wheelchair the same price as a vehicle? Right? Like
Yeah.
like it is my vehicle and so I understand, but there's in my mind, right? Some people may disagree with me. In my mind, there should be no scenario where my medical equipment costs more than cars and costs more than some other things, but that's a world we live in right now.
And it's a probably a fairly captive market too. Like there's probably not that many different manufacturers, or are there a lot of manufacturers?
There are the one like Permobile and Quantum. I use a Quantum chair right now, but it's all kind of the same thing, right? They're different price ranges. I mean, people are so shocked every time I tell them, yeah, my wheelchair is as much as your car, right? Like, and it granted it has bells and whistles, right? It tilts back, it reclines, it goes up and down, but like those are things that I need as part of daily function, and the fact that they are as expensive as they are, like make that make sense, right? Like
Mhm.
medical devices are things that people need in our shoes as disabled folks. in order to live their life. And so the fact that we have to kind of give away an arm and a kidney in order to be able to afford it, right? Like it's never really made sense to me.
We often talk about when it comes to women, the quote unquote pink tax, right? Like the pink tax refers to somebody that is a woman going into the store and buys a razor that might cost twice as much. And I think that very similarly, there's a disability tax. There's a tax for literally everything that is attached to disability, in addition to any kind of ongoing medical needs that you have.
Yeah,
Like having a disability is expensive, going to all those different doctors, all those
yeah.
specialists. And it doesn't help that insurance might fight us tooth and nail for every single bit of coverage that comes along the way.
And it's like, so like, you brought up the disability tax, and like the immediate thing that came into my head was I'm a massive sports fan, right? So I
Mhm.
try to go to lots of sporting events, and I like to go to as many sporting events as I possibly can. In many cases, the accessible seating is at a higher charge rate than like
Really?
an able-bodied person can get a ticket for like $35 in the nosebleeds, and they're happy. But for me, right, I have to go to accessible seating, and typically those prices are astronomically or significantly higher than like I can't grab a $35 seat,
Yeah.
right? And so you're starting to see a lot more sports organizations actually have sort of reduced price accessible seating, and I wish that all sports venues did that, right?
Mhm.
Um, it kind of goes back to that idea of the disability tax, right? Everything is astronomically higher when you are living life as a disabled person.
Absolutely. I want to dig into some of the different things that you called out specifically. And while we're on the topic of cars, let's talk cars because everybody's talking about driverless cars. I live in the Central Texas, and when I'm out on a 15-minute walk, I kid you not, like I am passed by three different Waymos every single time.
Yeah,
Now, this stands as an enormous opportunity, right? Because there are so many people that cannot drive due to their disability, or they may not choose to drive.
sure.
One of my favorite comics, actually, Adam Conover, choosing not to drive because his ADHD is severe enough to where he feels like he'd be a danger to other people if he's in a vehicle on the
Sure,
road. So
sure.
there's a variety of different reasons why. And driverless technology stands as an opportunity for disabled people to have the same access to be able to get to work every single day without having to be able to operate the wheels themselves. But
Yeah,
what do we need to be thinking about from like an advocacy and inclusion perspective?
yeah. I've had a lot of conversations with people who kind of work in the driverless car space, and I can tell you, as somebody that has never driven and has always been dependent on other people, granted, I have an incredible support circle that, I have friends that will drive my van. We'll go to movies. We'll go to bars and restaurants. We'll do things that typical 35-year-olds, in my world will do. But like the whole thought of a driverless car to give me the fullest level of independence that I could ever ask for
Yeah.
is like that is like a euphoria thought. That is the dream. But I often wonder, okay, if driverless cars do become into regular manufacture, and like the average person can buy them, are you going to be required to have a driver's license? Because
Mhm. Yeah.
i I don't have a driver's license, right?
Yeah.
One, I don't need to be able to, I don't drive, and so therefore I don't need a driver's license. But is that going to become like a haves and have nots thing, right? Which would once again alienate the disability community, because how many people with disabilities are going to go through the driving test and are going to, like, can they pass a driving test? Can they pass the road portion, right? Like in many cases, the answer to that question is some can if they use hand controls,
Sure.
but like for me, I basically was told I can't drive because of my startle reflex due to my cerebral palsy.
Okay.
And so the driver trainer that I was working with was like, I would not feel safe giving Matthew ability to drive, because my when I startle, my reaction is to do this, right? Like
Mhm.
my hands go up, and things of that nature. So if I'm driving and, like, let's say a car backfires and I were to do this while I'm driving, like that puts somebody at danger. But okay, we now have technology where, okay, a car can drive itself. But if there's going to be a situation where you're required to have these different credentials, or you're required to do other things. Once again, you're alienating a large community who is looking at this as the biggest form of freedom maybe that we've been able to have maybe ever, right? And
Mhm.
you may look at now this has not been confirmed because like driverless cars are not being mass produced, and the average person can't yet buy them.
Yeah.
But if we get to a point where they are regularly on the road, many people have them, are there going to be requirements that you have to have these different credentials? And if you do, are you going to alienate the disability community if that's required?
Absolutely. I'm also hearkening back too to a conversation that I had with Ryan Honick a couple months back. He also has cerebral palsy too, and he uses a guide dog, and he is pretty routinely turned away from Uber drivers where they will stop, act as though they're about to pick him up, and then speed away, and then deny him picking up. Now that's not legal, but it happens all the freaking time, and it's
Sure.
something that he posts about regularly because it is so routinely frustrating for him. So I think too, the other things that we need to think about is one, not giving technology that prerogative to turn people away, and we also need to be thinking about how can various different people with different modes of transportation, say for example wheelchair, can fit into the vehicles too, and that we have enough of those vehicles rolling around on the streets as well too, right?
Right, right. Because I mean, honestly, an accessible vehicle could work for everybody,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah.
why couldn't I I talk a lot about like, all right, if every car was accessible,
Mhm.
right, like we would solve the problem, right? It's just like the notion of like in architecture, right? We continue to build with stairs.
Mhm.
Why? Right? Like, and these are the types of big questions that like I really wish the community as a whole would continue to challenge,
Mhm.
right? I can't use stairs, but I can use a ramp. And Miles, you can use a ramp, right?
Yeah.
And a 20 something can use a ramp, right? A grandmother can use a ramp. So why do we continue to build with stairs
Yeah.
if it alienates certain groups of people, but a ramp would allow everyone to participate? Like, make that make sense, right? Like it, and I understand that like the norm is the stair, right? Well, let's change the norm, right? Let's have it be so that we are building from a universal design standpoint, i.e., ramps and other things. That becomes the norm in architecture, but that's not what we do. We build with stairs.
And from my understanding too, it's like less than 5% of American houses are built with people with motor disabilities in mind, and less than 5% are fully accessible. Is that somewhere in the ballpark?
I mean, housing is a major problem, right? Like the inventory of fully accessible housing for people with all types of disabilities like does not exist in this country.
Yeah.
There are sparing spots, there are communities, but again, why? Because here's the thing, and I bring this up to all the groups that I talk to all the time. We as a society need to be doing better, not just the disability community, not just you and I, Miles, but like the people who are watching today, the non-disabled people who are interested in this. Think about this, right? Disability is the only minority group any of us can join in the blink of an eye, and
Mhm.
it's the only minority group we're all going to eventually join as we age and get older. So, what are we doing as an entire society to build a society that will work for all of us in that time? Now, also keep in mind that that time could come when you're 5, that time could come when you're 50, that time could come when you're 150, right?
Mhm.
Like it there's no timeline for when you may become disabled. That's not just, like I love like being a disabled person has taught me so much, right?
Mhm.
I am patient, I am thoughtful, I am creative in the way that I think, right? Like I problem solve. All of those are skills that have come from me living a life as a disabled person. And so like disability is not a bad word. It is just a way of life that some people in society have to navigate. And so we have to do a better job of setting up a world that works, right? Like
Mhm.
I'm not kidding you that when I say, and this is like harsh to hear, but like I live in a society that doesn't work for me, right?
Yeah.
And to have to navigate that on a day in and day out basis, um to have to use the mental load that you and I as disabled folks have to navigate, uh, is a lot. I'm sure you have mobility abilities, right? And I don't navigate. I am able to hear, so right. My mom might say I might have selective hearing sometimes when I don't exactly hear what she wants me to do.
Sure.
However, um, you know, we all have our own challenges, but if the world becomes our challenge, what are we to do, right? And we have the ADA in place, and yes, it's been around for 35 plus years. But again, we're not talking about that next generation of challenges that we need to be addressing because we're still stuck on a space isn't accessible. Like in 2026, why is that still part of the conversation?
Why is it indeed? And speaking of which, speaking of the future, the only thing that people talked about in 2025 was artificial intelligence. Like
Uh-huh.
that was literally everything. And I'll be honest with you, I have skeptical optimism bordering on pessimism, like
Sure.
somewhere in there, right? Like, because I work with lots and lots of different people that are evaluating potentially hundreds of resumes every single day. And
Sure.
I see lots of biases against people with disabilities perpetuated on a regular basis, not at peak, but just across the broader spectrum of hiring in general. So if you start talking about things like career gaps, if you start talking about things like quote unquote job hoppers, oh, such a dirty word, right?
Right.
Or if you even think about people that are coming in for that interview, virtual or in person, and they're being turned away because they can't make eye contact. And I start thinking about how artificial intelligence is getting plugged into this. And oftentimes it's getting plugged in a way that might be a little bit reckless. So,
Sure.
what are your thoughts as far as like what do we need to be thinking about from AI, not only from like a hiring perspective, but from a broader disability perspective?
Yeah, I think it's a balancing thing, right? Because and to be very honest with you, I was skeptical also,
Hmm.
right? Because I was very much of the mindset of, okay, like if somebody starts using AI, does that I'm gonna use some harsh phrasing, but it's kind of the only way I can think, like, to be kind of this poignant with it. If
Hmm.
somebody's using AI, are they becoming quote unquote dumber, right? And less intelligent
Sure.
because they're depending on, oh, AI will write my essay, or AI will do XYZ. And I was really reluctant for the longest time to use like Chat GPT and other AI tools. But I started using it and I was like, this is incredibly helpful,
Hmm.
right? Not in the sense of like, I want you to do the work for me, but hey, I have this idea. I want to talk it out with you, ChatGPT, and can then you give me tools or directions on like, okay, Matthew, here's how you're going to go about solving this idea.
Hmm.
A lot of people with disabilities have a hard time getting started, right?
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of an issue of like, I don't even know where to begin. And
Hmm.
so if you could plug in an idea to ChatGPT and say, okay, I want to do this problem, how where do I go to get started? If even if I was given like if it gave somebody an idea on here's how you start an essay, or you're reading this book, here's what the that's not to say that we don't want them to do the work of reading the book, right? But it
Right.
is can be used as a tool, particularly for disabled people, to ask questions if they have learning challenges or um, uh, other things. But that's not to say to only use ChatGPT. Like what I try to do is I use ChatGPT and then I meld in my own thoughts and my own ideas, right? So I will get a roadmap from ChatGPT and then I will go back. I might use some of the elements of what ChatGPT gives me, but I will also then try to make sure that I am using my voice or using some of my ideas mixed in with what ChatGPT is providing me. So I'm not 100% like I'm just not straight up copying and pasting what ChatGPT puts into the app or whatever. And so when I say it's a balance, that's what I mean. It's kind of blending both, like using it as a learning tool and then blending it into what you would already know.
What changed my mind ultimately to be more receptive to it, because I come from a lot of my friends are artists, and they're seeing their work stolen, and that automatically puts a bad taste in my mouth to see
Sure,
that kind of thing happening to them. And also, as a longtime writer, I'm very protective and I'm very skeptical of anything being able to replace me and the work that I produce. But
sure,
I think what changed my mind is I read an article about different workplace situations that come up where people with autism are using ChatGPT to figure out how to navigate complex social situations that
right,
otherwise they might have challenges with.
sure,
Meanwhile, their coworkers that realize that they're autistic are plugging into ChatGPT as well. How do I engage with this? And at first, I was kind of appalled by that. Like, gosh, we're taking such a human function and we're plugging it into a computer and stuff. But when I turned around and asked somebody with autism directly what they thought about it, they're like, that sounds good to me. Like the access to being able to have a counselor or having a second opinion or things like that can be invaluable. And
sure.
so there doesn't seem anything wrong with me inherently there. And so that kind of changed my mind a little bit. And so I think we need to be thinking about not only how these AI tools are crafted in a way to be as inclusive as possible, but we need to be thinking about access within workplaces too, so that people can use them to their fullest extent if they would benefit and if they would be a reasonable accommodation.
Sure, and the thing that I would add to that too, though, is like you had brought up like kind of a therapist in a way,
Mhm.
using ChatGPT as a therapist. I would also, however, I don't want people to become solely dependent on ChatGPT to solve those problems. It
100%.
again is a tool that you can use to get answers. I would then also encourage you to use, like, using the therapy example, if you wanted to get those soft skills more, like if I am a person with autism, I don't want to speak and pretend that I am a person with autism. I know a lot of people with autism and have had conversations with them, but kind of bringing that thread forward, you should also, in conjunction with ChatGPT, work with a life skills person, work with somebody that can give you all that. It should not be ChatGPT should not be your primary source of how do I, like, what life skills do I need to know, right? Like it is a tool to do that. But I guess what I'm also saying is I don't want to eliminate that tool entirely, but there also needs to be a human element to anything that we're doing. Again, it's a balance of both worlds.
I think the other thing we need to think about too is what kind of data we're feeding into it as well, because, and I've shared this example with you before too, that the vast majority of the time when you go to Google and type in a person with a disability into Google and do an image search,
Yep.
90% of the time it's going to be invisible disabilities
Yep.
that comes up. And I think too that a lot of times those might be people that are sitting in a wheelchair pretending to be disabled.
Inauthentic imagery.
Exactly, yeah, but when we think about stuff like that, we think about what kind of input is going in, what kind of biases are going in, what kinds of stereotypes are going in about people with disabilities that's going to be regurgitated to people, and they may not be any the wiser too. Like, I think we
Sure.
need to be thinking about inputs that's going into these systems too.
Yeah, yeah, and I think too, like, the other element is, like, I want people to come up and ask me questions, right? I
Mhm.
like I think I understand why, like, society has the fear, right? Because they don't want to put their foot in their mouth or they don't want to say the wrong thing.
Yeah,
And my response to that is like, if you come up to me and say the wrong thing, I'm not going to chastise you or I'm not going to be angry with you. That is my opportunity to educate you and say, actually, we don't use the word handicapped anymore.
sure.
We don't do XYZ. The issue then becomes if you continue to do it. Right.
Sure.
If after I've educated you and after, we've sat down and I've talked to you about it, if you continue to do it, that's when we have a problem because you're not respecting my desire to use person first language, to use identity first language, whatever the case. That's when I get angry, right? It's not a matter of like, oh, I make a mistake here and there. Like, that's fine. It's the continued mistake when after I've done my education piece that becomes the challenge. The other piece is like, I also would love to live in a world where I don't have to be the educator, right?
Yeah.
Like, you are inherently aware Matthew's just a good dude. He just happens to have to do things a little differently. I don't need to talk to him as if he's 5 years old. I don't like he is intelligent. He is uh articulate, like all the things. And we need to break down those assumptions that people have. I know that they come from a place of like fear and other things, but the way we break down that fear is to push through it, right?
Yeah.
And to I would much rather you try to have a conversation with me and like allow me to correct you than like, oh my God, I'm paralyzed. I can't go up to talk to Miles because if I say the wrong thing, then like he's going to be upset or whatever else. That to me is a worse outcome than if I go up and have a conversation with Miles, say the wrong thing, and then we're able to sort of dialogue about it and get an understanding as to why. Okay, like that hurt. Here's why it hurt. Um, and then we move forward and you are better off for having that interaction.
I think
um,
that really speaks to your last point too, and that is inclusion. So could you elaborate a little bit more on inclusion and how that is a future disability advocacy
yeah,
issue?
I mean, I like we need to be thinking about inclusion in every aspect of everyday life in
Mm,
everything that we do, right?
okay.
Like, and it's not even just inclusion of disabled people, it's inclusion of difference, right?
Mm,
Like we are kind of in a unfortunate time right now where this notion of difference and inclusion and togetherness is kind of at a crossroads,
yeah.
right? And we are all different in certain ways. Like Miles, you like board games. I like board games too, just not to the level that you do, right? Where you're making your own board games
I'll
and
work on it with you. I'll
yeah,
work on
I
it.
hey, let's make a board game, Miles. I'm down for it. But like we have to be able to like talk about difference. We have to be able to have uncomfortable conversations, not to say that I'm trying to like put you in a gotcha situation, Miles, but to like understand each other's values and kind of ideal systems, because I'm going to look at things differently as a disabled person. I'm going to have a frame of reference differently as a disabled person than you might, right? And let's talk about that. Let's grow from that. But because diversity inclusion is a bad thing and like it's we are my work has gotten a lot harder over the last 10 years when this whole DEI conversation has, to again be a little bit direct, kind of been under attack, so to speak,
Sure.
right? And and we're all different, right? We all have uniquenesses, and we need to make sure that we are thinking about inclusion in our workplaces, in our extracurricular places, in our homes, in everything that we do, because you never know when you might be that person that is othered or differenced or whatever the case may be. And if we set up a space that, to the best of its ability, tries its best to welcome everyone,
Mhm.
you're going to make mistakes, sure. Like nothing is perfect. I don't want to claim that like I'm expecting this perfect utopia of a situation. That
Yeah.
is not possible. However, we can improve upon it, right? It is um and so yeah, thinking about inclusion, kind of how can I embed that into every aspect of my daily life to make sure that Miles is included, to make sure that Matthew's included in any form. For you, do we have captions on? Do we have, for me, is there a ramp for, um, that shouldn't be, oh snap, we forgot captions, or oh snap, I forgot a ramp. That should be, okay, we have chairs, we have a stage, we have a ramp to get on the stage. Like it should be part of the checklist of
Mm.
of the nature of every checklist. Like, okay, we have captions on, and we do it everywhere, not upon request, not because Miles has put in this accommodations request, but because we just do it, right?
Yeah.
And then Miles doesn't even need to ask, right? Because it's part of the fabric of what we are doing already, and that's not where we are today. And I
And
would
I would
love to be in a
remind
situation.
people, yeah, I would
Oh, I'm sorry, I
remind
got
people.
fired up. I got
Oh,
fired up. Sorry.
you're good. You're good. Well, I would remind any of the audience members that are listening or reading it after the fact too, that if your disability inclusion strategy is to follow the ADA, you don't have a disability inclusion strategy. Like
Right.
the ADA does nothing for cultural inclusion, acceptance, things of that nature. It does not do anything in that regard. So
And from a business standpoint, right, cultural inclusion starts at the top of the business,
yeah.
right? It's a matter of there needs to be buy-in from the top of the organization to say we're going to welcome people with disabilities into the workplace. We are going to when we welcome them, we're going to say, when we're looking for new hires, we want people LGBTQ plus people. We want people of color. We want people with disabilities. We're going to be explicit in asking for that and saying that like you are welcome to come to work in this space. And we're going to be intentional about how we build out the space, right? We're going to make it so that it works for wheelchair users, that it works for people with service animals, that it works for people on the autism spectrum, right? That we have a quiet space or we have other things. All of those things are going to end up helping your non-disabled employees too. And there is data that says if you do all of these inclusion efforts, your retention rate goes up, your productivity rate goes up, right? It is, and not just for your people that are asking for those requests, but your entire organization. And so we have to build that into everything that we do, and that even includes if we are doing offsite. Like let's say you're an organization that does offsite community service events for your organization. Okay, do those community service events in accessible locations, so that I, as a wheelchair user, can participate. And if you do, take a picture of me to show that I am also part of the organization doing the community service. Put it up in your building, right? If I see somebody that looks like me, I am more likely to want to go work in that community or work in that space.
We have so many different really great ideas right there. We better wrap it up for the day. But Matthew,
Sure.
thank you so much for coming on. I really admire the work that you do, the
Thank you.
perspective that you provide. Anything else that you want to share from Six Wheels Consulting and what you're up to these days?
Yeah, so thank you, Miles, and thank you for having me on. If I can help anyone think about how they can then make disability part of their corporate culture, right? That is something that we do as an organization. Um, if anyone needs a speaker at an event, or if I can help any of your organizations from an assessment standpoint or anything, please check out our website. We're all over social media. We're at sixwheelsconsulting.com. It's the number six, not spelled out, but the number six. And we would love to work with you. We'd love to help you as you try to work through your journey to inclusion, and be part of that journey with you and help you be as inclusive as possible.
Well, thank you very much, Matthew. And one other thing I'll mention too is that this is going to be part of an ongoing series. So if you have a chance, please join us 9:15 Central Time AM on Monday, where I'm going to be speaking with Grant Harris about autism and masking in the workplace, and particularly asking the question, does masking have its place, and how much should we be our authentic self versus how much is it a coping technique to be able to survive within the modern workplace? Thanks so much, everybody, for tuning in today. Thanks, Karen and Sydney, for dropping in a comment right there. It was good to see both of y'all. And this has been Miles and Matthew. Thanks so much for joining
Thanks,
us. Take
Miles.
care.